by some religious traditions that faith is this undoubting belief in a scripture or a supreme being. We are told that such a faith is the gateway to eternal bliss and salvation. I've read those texts, many of them, and I've studied this thing that we call faith. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, or maybe you might consider it to be good news, but undoubting belief in something is not faith. And I would go so far as to say that the biggest roadblock to faith, the way it's described in those scriptures that people profess to believe in, that their faith is their belief is the biggest roadblock to faith. Because always it is easier to praise the word, worship it even, rather than follow it. I see it as the greatest of all idolatries to worship the word rather than to have faith enough to actually follow the word. I mean, what did Jesus try to teach the world? To love our neighbors, right? To love our enemies. He invited us to love. But the tradition invites us to believe in Jesus. To have what they call faith in him, and that's enough. It solves all of our problems. If we believe hard enough and eliminate all doubt, then supposedly we'll be filled with peace and love and we'll achieve eternal salvation. That's what's called magical thinking. We do it as children. Just believe hard enough and then whatever we want will happen. And we learn it doesn't happen. A belief is really just an idea. It's something we choose to be true, whether it be because of the evidence or in spite of the evidence, whether it is rational or irrational. The vast majority of our beliefs were attained in childhood, long before the ability to rationally evaluate them was developed. And these beliefs span the spectrum of human experience from the nature of good and evil to the best way to cook a Thanksgiving turkey. You ever heard that story? The family tradition that they had, they did all kinds of weird contortions with the turkey legs and everything to make it fit in, to make it fit. And why did he asked, each generation why they did it? Well, my grandma did it that way. And you go back to the original source and you find out, you talk to grandma and say, well, why did you do it that way? Well, I had a really small oven. That was the only way the turkey could fit. Right. But everybody thought it was the right way to cook a turkey because grandma's turkeys always tasted so good. So how many of those things in our lives do we pick up from our families, from school, from teachers, from society, that are just old ways of doing things that we haven't reconsidered? And we pick these up without ever thinking about it as we're growing up. Because that's what we do. We're sponges. Our brains just soak this stuff up. And it is from our beliefs that we interpret the events of our lives. They act as a lens. And our beliefs color their perceptions to coincide with what we have chosen to believe. Well, chosen now as adults, because now we have the ability to evaluate our beliefs. Relating what we have been taught to our own experience is a fundamental element of the religious life, in my opinion. Because we can hardly call the belief our own if we haven't made the effort to match it with our own experiences. If we just inherited our beliefs, they're not ours. We've just glommed onto somebody else's and said, that's what's true. But faith on the other hand, is more than belief. And it's grounded not in the certainty of our beliefs, but in our doubts. It is so easy to profess a belief in the comfort of our homes, the safety of a religious community where everybody tends to kind of believe the same thing. But it is so much more difficult to integrate our beliefs into our daily life. And that's where faith comes in. Faith is belief tempered by doubt and real-world living. As we attempt to integrate our beliefs into our lives, they are tested, challenged, and doubts arise. You've experienced this if you have tried to meet everyone on the street and look everybody on the street as though they have inherent worth and dignity, including that person that just cut you off, including that person who's been just tried to convert you to their religion, who has the opposite, bumper stickers as you do, about the opposite candidates. Imagine that person with inherent worth and dignity all the time. It's not so easy, is it? It's easy to talk about these things. Much harder to take them out into the world. But a belief that cannot stand up to such rigorous testing is really not worth holding on to. Now, as Unitarian Universalists, we generally don't share a lot of common beliefs. But what we do share is that common commitment to faithful living, to putting our beliefs, our principles, whatever they may be, into action. Denon Perry, noted peace activist and author, compared the call of faith with the trapeze.
Oh, that's a tough one.
Sometimes, he wrote, sometimes I feel that my life is a series of trapeze swings. I'm either hanging on to a trapeze bar swinging along, or for a few moments I'm hurtling across space between the trapeze bars. Mostly I spend my time hanging on for dear life to the trapeze bar of the moment. It carries me along a certain steady rate of swing, and I have the feeling that I am in control. I know most of the right questions, and even some of the right answers, he says. But once in a while, as I'm merrily or not so merrily swinging along, I look ahead of me into the distance, and what do I see? What does he see? He sees another trapeze bar looking at him. It's empty, he says. And all I know in that place in me that knows that this new bar has my name on it. It's my next step, my growth, my aliveness coming to me. In my heart of hearts, I know that for me to grow, I must release my grip on the present well-known bar and move to that new one. And each time it happens, I hope, I pray that I won't have to grab the new one. But in my knowing place, I know that I must totally release my grasp on my old bar, and for some moments in time, I must hurtle across space before I can grab the new one. And each time I do this, he says, each time I do this, I am filled with terror. It doesn't matter that in all my previous hurdles, I've always made it. Each time I'm afraid I'll miss, that I will be crushed on unseen rocks in the bottomless basin between the bars. But I do it anyway. I must. He continues. Perhaps this is the essence of what the mystics call faith. No guarantees, no net, no insurance, but we do it anyway because hanging on to that whole bar is no longer an option. And so for what seems to be an eternity, but actually lasts just a microsecond, I soar across the dark void called the past is over and the future is not yet here. Faith is letting go of that trapeze bar. Now, while it is true we cannot control the actions of other people, we cannot control the weather, the movements of tectonic plates, or even the occasional bacterial or viral infection. While it's true that we cannot control any lot of what happens to us, we can always control, if we choose, to interpret what happens to us. How we interpret what happens to us. That's where our control is. My heroes have always been those men and women that have broken from tradition and followed the calling of their heart, who acted in faith and followed their bliss. Moses, Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, even Rumi, one of my favorites. They rejected the narrative they inherited at birth and acted in compassion and love to change the world. In our own tradition, the Transcendentalists, Emerson, Thoreau, Margaret Fuller, they followed the same pattern. Helen Keller, another hero of mine, you all know her story. Struck by a fever at a very young age that left her deaf and blind. And with the guidance of her teacher, Anne Sullivan, she learned to communicate through the eyes and ears of others. And after graduating from Radcliffe College, Keller became a renowned author, activist, and lecturer. And she wrote, as part of a This I Believe essay, she said, I choose for my subject faith, wrought into life apart from creed or dogma. By faith, I mean a vision of good one cherishes and the enthusiasm that pushes one to seek its fulfillment regardless of obstacles. Faith is a dynamic power that breaks the chain of routine and gives a new, fine turn to old commonplaces. Faith reinvigorates the will, enriches the infection, and awakens the sense of creativeness. Active faith knows no fear, and it is a safeguard to me against cynicism and despair. Faith, then, is being open to change. Being open to the next transition in your life. Going outside of our comfort zone. Risking that. That's faith. Now, I've come to believe that's the only place that real change occurs. I have a sneaking suspicion that the transition zone is the only real thing. And the bars are the illusions that we dream up to not notice the void. Those places where we're comfortable. Those are the ones we're holding on to. Those aren't real. With all the fear that can accompany transitions, change, these points in time, they are still the most vibrant, growth-filled, passionate moments in our lives. And so, transformation of fear may have nothing to do with making fear go away, but rather with giving ourselves permission to hang out in the transition zone. That place between the trapeze bars. Allowing ourselves to dwell in the only place where change really happens. It can be terrifying there, but it can also be enlightening. Because hurtling through the void, we just may learn to fly. Now, all of us who have followed our passions, built a business, a career, a family, a congregation, from scratch. We can probably relate to this analogy of letting go of that comfortable job, that comfortable whatever is in your life, and taking that leap. All of us who work for peace and justice, we can relate to this trapeze. But as Denon illustrates, there is always one more bar calling us forward, calling us to transcend the limits of our imagination one more time, calling us to act again in faith, in service of life. Silently, name that bar that's calling you now. Just name it to yourself. What is that bar that's calling you? What is it? Now consider what is holding you back. What is it about the bar that you're hanging on to now that is so special that you can't let go and fly where life is calling you next? What's so special about where you are now that you can't let go? Hold on to that. When people adopt a religion, they generally adopt the story of the religion. The story becomes the lens for interpreting life's daily ups and downs. It's the same for Unitarian Universalists. We have a story. But all of us are also born into a set of stories, a family story, an ethnic story, a cultural story, a religious story. And the role we play initially is often determined for us by the order of our birth, whether we're oldest, middle, youngest, only, by our gender, by our size, our temperament, by any number of factors that are outside of our control. And we're given these roles by our family, by society. We don't choose them. But at some point in our lives, at some point in their maturation process, if we are lucky, we learn the truth about the story of our lives. We learn that the stories that we're born into are just stories. And the role we play in those stories is not fixed. And when we learn that the stories we are born into are just stories, we also learn that we can edit the script, change the story, change our role, and write our own ending. Because we can come to understand this at any point in our lives. Everything else was just prelude. And at this moment, we can rewrite it. Rewrite the whole ending of our lives at any point. And at this point, we become true actors and not just reactors. Yoruba priestess Louisa Taesh, quoted in the book Living Deeply, she makes this same point. She says, "One of the things I see as fundamental to personal empowerment is coming out of feeling like I'm a victim of my life into I am working with nature, community, and spirit to design and shape our lives." You go from me to an us. You go from a victim to an actor or an initiator. You go from feeling devalued to valuing what's already really around you. So in every situation, we can ask ourselves, am I being an actor or a victim? Am I valuing or devaluing? Am I focused on me or on us? And as humans, we are meaning makers. We can create any meaning we want. So why not create a life-enhancing set of possibilities rather than an endless refrain of victimizations and sufferings. But given our current political climate, the changing nature of our natural climate, given all the violence and suffering in the world, that safeguard against cynicism and despair is all the more important. Bring to mind again that bar that's calling you. And what's holding you back? Is that being the victim, being an actor? What is it about the bar you're hanging on to that's so special that you won't let go? And we can think about this in terms of our own lives, in terms of national debate, in the life of this congregation. There's always something we can do more. And there's always that fear that's keeping us where we are. Joseph Campbell wrote, if you follow your bliss, that faith, that next bar, you put yourself on a kind of track that has been there all the while, waiting for you. And the life that you ought to be living is the one you are living. Follow your bliss and don't be afraid, and doors will open where you didn't know they were going to be. If this were easy, anybody could do it. This is the life our principles are calling us to live. And if our principles were easy, the whole world would be Unitarian Universalists. It's not easy. But letting go of that comfort zone and flying through the air towards what is calling us next. That's where the magic happens. Where anything is possible. And where we create the world we want.